Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about a speech by the president of Russia. The speech was very recent, within the past few days, and the speech is Vladimir Putin addressing the various people within the economic sphere, so various businesses, other types of organizations, and other governments as well. And in this speech, we're going to learn a lot about Russia's perspective on the world, on the West, specifically America, on Russia's place within the world. And Russia is extremely important for the world currently. Whether you're a part of a business, an organization that is interested in working within Russia, which, need I remind you, has the largest natural resource reserves of the entire world, or you're just someone trying to live in a world that is kind of just going chaotic right now. Russia is trying to protect the Russian-speaking people within the former territory of Ukraine. And that has led to a very chaotic situation where the West has sanctioned Russia quite a bit, and Russia has managed to survive those sanctions, which we'll talk about more a little bit later. But that's really changed things throughout the world, and Russia is typically nowadays considered to be the third superpower of the world, along with China and the United States. And so even if you're not a part of a business interested in doing business within Russia, Russia and its policies and perspective will still impact you to a very, very large extent. So it's worth hearing what the president of Russia has to say here.
All humankind. President Putin, the floor is yours.
Friends, Mr. President, ladies, gentlemen, from the outset, I would like to welcome our friend, the President of the Algerian Republic, for having found the time and for coming here to today's event. Mr. President.
So just a kind of side note here is that Russia and China are very gracious towards other countries that are maybe not as strong as them. And that is completely the opposite of how America treats other countries. America treats every other country as subservient to it because the American government, American leadership is still under the impression that they're at the end of history and there's no competitors to them. There's no potential for competitors to ever exist to them. And for a country that's only a little over 2 centuries old, that's really miraculous that they're that egotistical, that overconfident, that arrogant. But you see here Russia treating other countries extremely, extremely well. And we'll talk about that more later, but that actually serves a major purpose in terms of outcompeting the United States.
Thank you. Mr. President, guests from outside Russia, certainly my statement is mostly going to be dedicated to Russia's development as well as our plans along different avenues. But I believe that this...
He's being a little bit coy here about our plans along different avenues. Well, that's politician speak. What he's talking about, at least to a certain extent, is the fact that the United States wants to break up Russia, and after fracturing it, it wants to exploit the mini-states in order to exploit the people and extract their resources. And so he's talking about how do we directly compete with the West and specifically with America.
is going to be of certain interest to you too, because many of you are either already working in Russia or hoping and planning to work here, and so you're not going to be indifferent to our assessments of the current state of affairs in our country, as well as our plans in order to understand whether to deal with this. And I hope that this is going to be of some interest to Mr. President as well. My apologies in advance if in certain parts of my statement I am going to address primarily the internal audience. But what we are doing currently in our economy might be of some use.
Just as a kind of side note, when it comes to public speaking, you really have to know your audience. And he's in a bit of a difficult position right now because he's trying to speak both to a domestic audience because they are in St. Petersburg and this is an economic forum about the economic future of Russia, but he also is trying to speak to an international audience. And so it is a little bit difficult. It's nice to see that he, as a world leader, is cognizant of the fact that he's trying to speak to two audiences and trying to inform and persuade and maybe even woo both of the audience for popular opinion of him at home domestically, as well as to entice businesses and various governments to Russia's side abroad. And so it's a difficult balancing act to do a speech targeted at multiple audiences. And so we're going to see that here.
For other countries and might serve as a foundation for our cooperation. Once again, I would like to welcome the participants and guests of the 26th International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg. I spoke here last year and shared my vision of the challenges Russia and the whole world were facing, and I dwelled in detail on our actions meant to ensure steady, long-term sovereign development of our country. I would like to remind you that the second quarter of last year became the most difficult one for Russia's economy and for Russia's business, because back then circumstances were changing rapidly.
So what he's talking about here is they were forced into a corner, backed into a corner when it came to Ukraine. I mean, there was all kinds of things going on. There were Russian speakers being not only discriminated against, but outright attacked since 2014 in Ukraine. There was Ukrainian government, supposedly a peace government, but instead did more warmongering, had NATO officers training them within the country, getting more NATO equipment. They were potentially thinking about putting nukes in Ukraine from NATO countries. They were doing all kinds of things. Ukraine wanted to join NATO, and NATO was not shutting that down. So there were a variety of reasons that Russia had to go into Ukraine, but they weren't sure exactly how America was going to respond and how the West was going to respond. And what we ended up finding was that the West threw everything it had in the kitchen sink at Russia. And I, quite frankly, was getting a little bit into the habit, into the expectation of thinking of, if the United States throws its entire economic weight around, then they could just destroy any nation. I watched what they did to Venezuela. I watched what they did to Iran. I watched what they did to Cuba. All these different places, sure, they're smaller countries, but when the United States wanted to sanction them, wanted to destroy their economy, wanted to make sure that their people suffered, the United States was able to do it. And so, yeah, other countries could be upset about this, but they couldn't really do anything about it, because if they tried to break away from the United States had these economic tools that would allow them to punish these other countries. What Russia did during the first half of last year was, and I'm talking about 2022 here, if you're watching sometime far in the future, what they did in 2022 was they showed, sure, the United States will sanction other countries, punish them for things that the United States doesn't like, but that doesn't mean that the nation has to be destroyed. It's entirely possible to not only survive, but to thrive given Western sanctions. And Russia showed that. They were the first country that really showed that. I mean, you could kind of say like Iran had a few industries and they were doing okay, but like, no, really, Russia was the one that the West did everything. And they were expecting the economy to be shocked just like it was after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But what they got instead was a very strong, a very resilient Russia that is seeing GDP growth. And I think they thought that was unexpected too. Given how they were acting, I think they were just like barely thinking like, oh, we'll stay afloat here. But in reality, other countries saw what was happening and they're like, actually, we kind of want to work with Russia because they're sticking it to this big bully, the United States. So we'll get back to this in a second, but that is the end of this specific portion of the video. I hope you like this. We'll be back with more commentary, more analysis of Vladimir Putin's speech in a little bit. So this is the end of part 1. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope you have a good day. Bye.